to Quebec. Quebec was founded by the great Samuel de Champlain in 1608. Only 21 years later, his supplies and reinforcements intercepted at Tadoussac by the privateer David Kirke, his ammunition spent and his garrison starving, Champlain was forced to leave the infant colony. 3 years later, Quebec was returned to France by treaty, and Champlain came home. The years passed, and New France probed deeper into the continent. Settlements at Trois-Rivières and Montreal, then known as Ville-Marie, and forts Frontenac, Niagara, and Detroit, proclaimed its growing influence and adventuresome spirit. Meanwhile, its rival to the south was driving to the Adirondack and Allegheny Mountains, and beyond, and along the undefined wilderness border, bloody warfare, raid and counter-raid signaled the growing tension. In 1690, the American colonists, angered by surprise raids on Schenectady and Portland, and the constant coastal raids of privateers out of Port-Royal, planned a two-pronged attack by land and sea. By land, an expedition up the Lake Champlain route against Montreal. By sea, a fleet to Quebec under the command of Sir William Phips, Governor of Massachusetts. In October, the aging but iron-willed governor, Louis de Buade, Comte de Frontenac, looked down from the heights of Quebec to find Phips' fleet below. Phips sent a messenger to Frontenac, demanding his surrender. The governor's reply still rings out through Canadian history.
Let me tell you, General, you will have his answer from the mouth of my cannons.
Unable to take the city and fearful of the bitter cold of the approaching Canadian winter, Phips withdrew. The rejoicing in Quebec was great. Bells rang, drums sounded, flags waved. To mark the victory, the Church of the Christ Child in Quebec's lower town was renamed Notre-Dame de la Victoire. In the 18th century, the French, under the first governor Vaudreuil, carried out a series of successful raids on New England, notably at Deerfield and Portland, and in 1711, Sir Hovenden Walker brought retaliation. His mighty fleet sailed from Boston, along with an army almost equal to the entire population of Canada. The over-optimistic Walker had embarked civilians to colonize his conquest. Off Egg Island, 300 miles east of Quebec, the scattered fleet was blown aground. 7 transports broke apart, and 1,000 corpses littered the shore. The pious French gave thanks to God and renamed their church Notre-Dame des Victoires. The Treaty of Utrecht in 1713 brought peace to Great Britain and France. Across their empire, reduced by the loss of Acadia and Newfoundland, the French built forts on strategic trade and attack routes. Louisbourg on Île Royale, Beauséjour, Carillon, Presqu'île, Duquesne. Their strategy was to hem in the American colonies between the mountains and the Atlantic. The British countered this threat with their own fort system: Halifax, William Henry, Oswego, Necessity. 1756. Great Britain and France are again at war, and for the first time, regular army units are sent to fight in the European manner on North American soil. The Marquis de Montcalm takes command of French troops in New France. 1758. Louisbourg falls to the British. Quebec is now vulnerable from the sea. Only Montcalm's defeat of superior forces at Ticonderoga gives hope to the city. 1759. Preparations are being made for a massive attack on Canada. General John Prideaux up the Mohawk River to Niagara. General Geoffrey Amherst up Lake Champlain to Montreal. General James Wolfe up the St. Lawrence River to Quebec, the key to the French supply system, the neck of the bottle.
June 4th. The British fleet sails from Louisbourg under the command of Vice Admiral Charles Saunders. June 27. Wolfe lands on Ile d'Orléans unopposed. From the western tip of the island, he studies the city's defense. Batteries command the narrows between Quebec and Lévis. In the harbor lie gunboats and fireships. Behind a log boom, two sunken hulks bristle with guns and defend the mouth of the St. Charles River. Floating batteries guard the Beauport shore. And behind them, from the St. Charles River to the Montmorency Falls, there is a line of earthworks and redoubts. But the strongest defense of all is the river barrier and the steep cliffs of its banks, the cliffs extending 8 miles to the west above the town.
At his camp on the Beauport shore, Montcalm watches the arrival of the enemy fleet with apprehension. He decides to take the initiative. 2 nights later, on June 29th, a mass of boats and rafts, charged with shot, powder, tar, and bombs, drifts quietly down the river among the ships of the anchored fleet. At a signal, their skeleton crews set them afire and abandon them. Panic strikes the fleet, and sailors rush to drag the fire vessels to shore.
June 30. Wolfe moves swiftly against weak points in the defense. Lévis Point is taken, and 2 days later, gun batteries are established to bombard the city. July 8. A brigade secures the heights across the Montmorency River.
July 12th. The bombardment begins. Day after day, cannon and mortar rain destruction on Quebec. Fires break out all over a city, gradually being reduced to rubble. Notre-Dame des Victoires, symbol of earlier French victories, burns.
On the night of July 18, 7 British warships defy the fort and sail past Quebec. More will follow. July 31, Wolfe decides to attack with a frontal assault on the Beauport shore and a flanking sally across the Montmorency River. The French rushed up reinforcements and wait. From 10 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, the Navy's guns bombard the French lines. At 3, the attack boats move toward shore. But the plan goes wrong. Concealed shoals ground the boats. The tide is low and the footing treacherous. It is only late in the afternoon that a suitable landing place is found. French fire rakes an undisciplined charge by grenadiers and Royal Americans. The forces of nature are with the French. The sky darkens, lightning flashes, and thunder drowns out the rumble of the guns. Slipping and sliding in the rain and mud, the attackers are cut down on the banks of the Beauport shore. The survivors retreat to their boats, and the assault is over before any attack across the Montmorency can develop. Wolfe reviews the fiasco with despair. Montcalm is joyful, but knows the battle is not decisive. He writes in a letter, "You see, monsieur, that our affair is undoubtedly only a small prelude to something more important, which we now await." September 1. The season is advanced, and time is running out for the invader. Wolfe withdraws from Montmorency and most of Ile d'Orléans, and the direction of his strategy shifts upriver. His army and fleet gather, poised, upstream, above the sea. September 12, sunset. The British troops embark in their landing craft at Cap Rouge, 8 miles west of the city, and await the falling tide. Meanwhile, Admiral Saunders, to mislead the French as to the true point of attack, brings some ships into line with the Beauport shore and bombards the French position. This tactic holds down the French troops. The night is clear and cool. The moon is in its last quarter. Its light is feeble. Towards 2 in the morning, the tide begins to ebb, and the landing craft drifts silently downriver. Wolfe himself is in one of the vessels. There is a legend that as the boats drift down the river, that fateful night, Wolfe intoned to himself the famous lines of Gray's elegy.
The boast of heraldry, the pomp of power, and all that beauty, all that wealth e'er gave, awaits alike the inevitable hour. The paths of glory lead but to the grave.
And then he murmured,
Gentlemen, I would rather have written those lines than take Quebec.
The French sentries along the shore have been warned to expect a convoy of their supply boats that night. They are not told when the movement is cancelled. Wolfe's boats creep close to their landing place at a little cove called Ensemble, a challenge.
Qui vive? La France, vive le roi!
Quickly returns Captain Fraser in his impeccable French.
Laissez-les passer. Ce sont nos gens avec les provisions.
The first boats land without a shot being fired. Quickly, 24 volunteers under Captain Delone scramble up the cliff and storm the guard post on the heights. The landing is detected, and the gun battery at Samos opens up. It is silenced. The main army, 4,500 men strong, climbs laboriously to the heights above. At dawn, Montcalm, at his headquarters in the Beauport Manor House, learns of the landing. He orders the march to Quebec. By 9 in the morning, all the troops are on the plains. The armies face each other. Their lines of battle stretch out over a mile. From the woods on each side, Canadian militia and native warriors snipe at the British as they form their line, the first too deep, thin red line in military history. Montcalm gives the order to charge. The first French volley is fired at 100 yards. The French come on relentlessly with muskets firing. 70 yards. 50 yards. The gap closes. 40 yards. And then, as the discharge of a single weapon, the thin red lines fire. A second volley. A third volley. In 20 minutes, the battle is over. Hit in 2 places, General Wolfe lies dying. Over near the city's walls, his brave adversary, Montcalm, receives a mortal wound. Supported by 2 soldiers, he passes through the Saint-Louis Gate.
Oh my God, the Marquis is dying!
A voice cries out. It is nothing. Really nothing. Do not grieve for me, dear friends.
Deprived of its leader, the French army withdrew upriver under the protecting fire of the Canadians. The next morning, Montcalm died and was buried in the chapel of the Ursuline convent. 5 days later, the Chevalier de Ramsay turned over the undefended city to the enemy. A British garrison, under Brigadier James Murray, occupied the ruined city. The winter was severe, and by spring, Murray had scarcely 3,000 men fit to defend it.
New France, painfully wounded, but still defiant, lived on in the hope that the spring would bring help from overseas. The gifted Chevalier de Lévis succeeded to the command of the French army, and in the spring of 1760, he struck swiftly to recapture Quebec before it could be reinforced. In late April, he is before Quebec. Murray marches out to meet him. The British line extends from Saint-Louis Road to Dumont's Mill on Sainte-Foy Road. In the shelter of the woods to the west, Lévis awaits Murray's attack. The British redcoats advance over thawing, muddy ground. They are met by a withering fire. The battle rages for 2 hours, the heaviest fighting taking place about Dumont's Mill, where the British right wing breaks.
It is a bloodier battle than the Plains of Abraham. A third of Murray's army is killed or wounded. The beaten British army retreats to refuge behind the walls of Quebec, but Lévis' exhausted soldiers can only lay siege.
But the fate of Quebec and of Canada was to depend neither on the Battle of the Plains of Abraham, nor on the Battle of Sainte-Foy. Both armies were decimated. Whose ships would first bring reinforcements in the spring? On May 9, one ship arrived, British. On May 15, 2 more ships, also British. Lévis raised his siege the following day.
The British were now masters of the land, but they were by no means conquerors of its people, nor of their spirit. The French Canadians retained their faith, their language, and their law. The identity and distinctive culture of the nation were preserved down the centuries by a proud and tenacious people, and are the bedrock of the vibrant society of Quebec today. French and British worked together to rebuild Quebec, and it was none too soon, for a new menace would shortly appear from the south. The American colonies, no longer threatened by the French to the north, and unwilling to pay for Britain's wars, grew increasingly restive. The historic cry was raised: no taxation without representation. 1775, the year of destiny. All hope of reconciliation has ended. The British troops fire upon the colonial militia at Lexington, and the colonies are soon in full rebellion. Within months, General George Washington decides to strike at Britain through Canada, hoping to enlist the French Canadians as allies. In early September, Benedict Arnold sets out from Boston by the long, hard route up the Kennebec and down the Chaudière. It is one of history's epic marches. Incredible hardships are endured before Arnold reaches Quebec. His bedraggled army immediately withdraws to Pointe-aux-Trembles to await the arrival of General Richard Montgomery. Montgomery, with only a small force, invades Canada by the Champlain route, capturing Montreal on his way to Quebec. He joins Arnold on December 1st, and the next day, they set off to seize the city. Behind the walls, Sir Guy Carleton commands a small army of British regulars and Canadian militia. On the night of December 31st, in a raging snowstorm, Montgomery orders the assault. A decoy attack is directed towards St. John's Gate. The main attack falls upon Lower Town, Montgomery along the river by the way of Cape Diamond, and Arnold flanking on the left to complete the pincer. Montgomery's men make their way along the shore to the first line of defense, 2 barricades and a blockhouse at Près-de-Ville. They saw through the first barricade with ease. The general personally helps saw a hole through the second and leads his men through. A rocket soars into the night to signal the moment to attack.
Men of New York, you will not fear to follow where your general leads. Push on, brave boys. Quebec is ours.
The Americans charge. A volley of ball and shot from the blockhouse meets the attack. Montgomery is killed on the spot. On the other side of the city, Seeing the rocket but unaware that Montgomery's attack has failed, Arnold pushes into the narrow streets to assault the barricade at Sotomayor. A dreadful fire pours down on his troops as they pass under the walls below the Hôtel Dieu, and Arnold is hit in the leg. The attack is pressed under Captain Daniel Morgan. The battery at Sotomayor falls to the Americans. The barricade, furiously defended by Captain Alexandre Dumas and a company of Canadians, blocks the way. A force of Canadian militia rushes down Palace Hill to cut the Americans off at the rear. Surrounded, the Americans throw down their arms and surrender. Only a few escape across the ice of the St. Charles Bay. The attack has failed. In the spring, with the arrival of British ships, Arnold raises the siege and moves south. The ramparts of Quebec, upon which you are now standing, have never since felt the threat of invasion. The cannons stand idle, a mute monument to the bravery of the stout defenders of this historic city.